3. Okay, so welcome again. The panel today is part of our series of events, Perspectives on Remembrance. We have a couple of events in Leipzig, so if you live in Leipzig, you can check them out on our website, revolutionale.de. And we will also have another online talk this year on October 3rd. It's about Poland, democracy in danger, developments and rule of law and civil society in Poland. So if you're interested, you're also warmly welcome to join there. You find also more information about that on our website. Yeah, so as already said, we have 3 panel guests today. Attila Pock. Attila Pock is historian and senior researcher at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Kőszeg, Hungary. Welcome Andrea Tompa. Andrea Tompa is a writer and published several novels. And he's also associate professor at the Babeș-Bolyai University in the...
Oui, hello, hello, hello. Oui.
Okay, where did I stop? Andrea Tompa is associate professor at the Babeș-Bolyai University in the Hungarian Theater Department in Cluj, Romania. And our third guest is Andrea Pető. Andrea Pető is also a historian and a professor in the Department of Gender Studies at the Central European University in Vienna, and also Doctor of Science of the Hungarian Academy of Science. Thank you again for being with us tonight, and maybe you want to introduce yourselves and your work a bit more further, and maybe you can also tell us why you engage in the field of remembrance or memory. So Andrea, which Andrea wants to start?
I saw that Attila is starting, right?
No, just to introduce yourself.
Oh, to introduce ourselves.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I'm happy to introduce myself, and I would really like to see the 3 brave and interested member of the audience. Who are they? And when we have got the question and answer, it would be fantastic to get to know that, what brought you here into this Zoom room, and then, figuring out, some common questions and concerns. So I'm a historian, and I was always interested in finding stories which are not being told, and the stories which are interesting. So and these are always the histories of the past, and you cannot live and exist in without having this kind of critical relationship to the past. So, I mean, that's the most general and not very original answer I can give you for this question. Thank you.
I continue. I have 2 different positions in observing the past. On one hand, I'm a writer, I'm a novelist, and I am a storyteller who was always telling stories related to the past 100 years in Hungarian history. And on the other hand, I research theater and teach theater and performing arts, and I am looking a lot at what is happening in theater, how theater is dealing with past elaboration and also past representation. So I have this position also as a researcher in contemporary performing arts.
Thank you. Let me continue. I spent most of my career with the Institute of History of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, where the first, that was 45 years, about 25 years I spent looking into various legacies of Hungarian democratic political thought, and during the second half of my career I was getting more and more interested in the anti-democratic legacy of Hungarian political thought, and both democratic and anti-democratic political thought traditions got a number of interpretations that takes me to the problem of remembrance.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing who you are. Attila, you finished. You also wanted to start providing us some context to the topic. You wanted to tell us the interpretations of the main course of Hungarian history and also give some broader context to the present state of culture of remembrance in Hungary. Yeah.
Yes, I prepared, because as I am going to use a number of dates and a number of names, I prepared a very small Word document. So let me start with the key dates of Hungarian history. If you are not living in Hungary, never studied, I think it's essential to keep them in mind if you want to understand memory politics. So one key date is the foundation of the Hungarian state in the year 1000. 1526 is the collapse of the medieval Hungarian Empire under the impact of the expanding Ottoman Empire. Then the next set of problems is the relationship to the Habsburgs, the place of Hungary in the Habsburg Empire. It is a major conflict at the beginning of the 18th century, and then a very important conflict in 1848-49. The next major turning point is the collapse of the Habsburg Empire and the totally transforming Hungarian landscape as a result of the defeat in the First World War, then the Second World War, then the 1956 revolution, and the most recent changes. Now, this will, to illustrate this, a colleague of mine collected these figures that in the 20th century, Hungary experienced 9 system changes, 6 state forms, 4 border changes, 3 revolutions, 3 occupations by foreign troops, so 2 world wars. So this was a busy history. And this takes me to a current remembrance policy issue. On the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the Trianon Peace Treaty, that is a most tragic event in Hungarian history. Our Prime Minister said the following on the 100th anniversary: there is not a single nation in the world that could have endured such a century, but we are stubborn, tough, and resourceful. Therefore, we have not only endured, but today we are winning again. So this is a peculiar use of history now. But during my career as a historian, in a very simplified way, I encountered in the profession and outside the profession in Hungarian public life, I think 4 major representations and interpretations of the main course of Hungarian history. One is that I would call a romantic revolutionary one, which puts the emphasis on class struggles and freedom struggles, like a peasant uprising in 1437, and then in 1514, anti-Habsburg uprisings at the beginning of the 18th century, 1848, the revolutions, the more democratic, and the communist revolution in 1918-1919. And according to this line of thought, which was a dominant Marxist interpretation, combined with the traditions of Romanticism, the last stage is 1945. When I was young, there was in the spring of every year, there were the so-called revolutionary youth days, which combined the legacy of 1848, 1919, and 1945 into one legacy, saying that this is the main course of Hungarian history, class struggle combined with a national struggle. But more or less parallel with that, but not a main core, the main stream, was what I would call a pessimistic interpretation of Hungarian history. That is what I could call the search for the causes of defeat. Because in 1526, the Ottomans defeated the Hungarians, 1711, the Habsburgs, 1849 again, 1920, Hungary is coming out as a defeated part of the defeated Habsburg monarchy. 1944, also a loser in the Second World War, and 1956, also in the short run, is also a defeat. So, and the problem for this interpretation, the question for this interpretation of Hungarian history is, what are the reasons for this series of defeats? Who is to be blamed for that? Who is responsible for that? Then there is a liberal interpretation, which is rooted very much in the legacy of the 1848 revolution. That is, when you count the Hungarian prime ministers, you start with the Hungarian prime minister after the revolution, 1848, and this is then continued with the republican tradition. The republic was announced in Hungary 3 times, in 1918, 1946, and in 1989. So this is a liberal legacy. So according to this interpretation of Hungarian history, there is a permanent struggle for freedom, for republicanism, and the question is whether this can be continued or cannot be continued. The fourth, which is very much connected to the present situation, is what I would call a national Christian conservative interpretation of the main course of Hungarian history, which is best reflected if you look at the Hungarian banknotes in circulation. In the it means about 420 or so forint is a euro, so that you can have an idea what these figures mean. So on the 10,000 forint banknote, you have got the founder of the Hungarian state, Saint Stephen, who ruled then from 1000 to 1038. On the 1,000 forint banknote, you have King Matthias, who ruled Hungary as a great Renaissance king from 1458 to 1490. On the 2,000 banknote, you have got a great prince of the 17th century in Transylvania, Gábor Bethlen. On the 500 forint, you have got the leader of an early 18th century anti-Habsburg struggle, Ferenc Rákóczi. And on the 5,000 banknote, you have got István Széchenyi, who was a great figure of the Hungarian Reform Age and founder of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. And on the 20,000 forint, you have got Ferenc Deák, who was the maker of a major agreement compromise between the Habsburgs and the Hungarians in 1867. They are all very logically connected, only Rákóczi doesn't properly fit into this interpretation of history. That is, there the emphasis on periods of consolidation. From this perspective, revolution and revolutionaries and frequently Republicans liberals are troublemakers. So there is a desperate call for stability and consolidation. And I think if after these main interpretations of Hungarian history, main tendencies, I would list 3 major pillars that I think are the pillars of the present system of remembrance, official system of remembrance. Of course, there are also non-official interpretations as well. So one is Saint Stephen, the founder of the Hungarian state, and in general, Hungary being presented as a major defender of Christianity and Christian values, because according to this interpretation of history, Christianity has the longest legacy in Hungary. That has always given strength and power for recoveries after difficult times. The second pillar of the remembrance policy is Trianon, that is the aftermath of the First World War, the tremendous territorial losses and the tragedy of Hungary after the First World War. And this is interpreted in a peculiar way. I picked a statement on behalf of our Prime Minister from December 2021. Let me quote it. What were once the Entente powers are now the open society, multiculturalism, and gender ideology. Then it was the occupation of physical territory, but now it is the occupation of spiritual and intellectual territory. Now, this is the second pillar of mainstream official remembrance. And the third one is the legacy. We are now just a couple of days before the anniversary of the 1956 revolution. 1956 interpreted as a simple anti-communist popular revolution without the involvement of reformed communists. So I have been asked to come up with some major interpretation, but what I should like to emphasize by way of conclusion is that, of course, this is not the views of historians, of historical scholarship. Some of these views are also reflected, of course, in historical scholarship, but historical scholarship is, of course, much more colorful. We have to make a clear distinction between remembrance policies, official remembrance policies, and the profession. And the profession is, of course, much more sophisticated. Politics are always trying to be black and white, very straightforward. A general problem in remembrance policies, which go through all the interpretations that I have listed, so from the beginning to the end, is to what extent Hungary and Hungarians are a victim, or to what extent Hungary and Hungarians belong to the group of perpetrators. In what historical period, how you define responsibility, both for successes and both for failures. And the last remark is in any interpretation of Hungarian history, you have to be aware of the fact that there are two main courses of Hungarian history: that of the history of the Hungarian state, which for many centuries includes sometimes majority non-Hungarians, and the history of the Hungarian nation. And the tensions and the differing interpretations are greatly due to the fact that it's not easy to combine these two stories, the history of the nation and the history of the state. So I hope I succeeded in doing the impossible, so trying to give a number of interpretations in 10 minutes. Okay, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a good summarize, I would say, in 10 minutes. I'm impressed. Yeah, before we come to the questions and discussion, Andrea, you wanted to continue and talk about illiberal memory politics.
Yep, thanks a lot. Let me share my screen. So I would like to thank you first the invitation and the brave three members of the audience who came to talk and discuss this with us. I mean, I will talk about why this event has been organized, because if there is an event which is focusing on a particular country, there is something wrong there, right? There is something which is interesting. So I will talk about this illiberal memory politics, and which is pretty interesting. Why is this a problem? Why do we have this particular event when we have an increasing interest to the past? The number of research institutes in the past 10 years increased by 5 times. The number of historians who are working on historical questions increased several times. There are lots of new statues, lots of new museums. So, I mean, everything is booming. So what is the problem with that? And I would like, I mean, the state is investing enormous amount of money in memory politics. What's the problem? And I would like to bring in this one example. And so I would like to illustrate the problem of the liberal memory politics through one example, which is this particular plan to be painted on these walls. And I just would like to ask the participants if you know who is on this, who is expected to be memorialized with this lion. Can you put it in the chat if you have got an idea? No, right? So then I tell you this is the planned memorial for Hanna Senes, who was a parachuter in 1944, who part of the British Army, planned to rescue the Hungarian Jews and betrayed and executed. And she's the part of the political religion of the State of Israel as the hero of the Jewish resistance. And this, what is the problem with this, right? Why aren't we happy with this plan? That's what I would like to tell you. And before we go to what is this illiberal memory politics, I'm arguing that the previous explanations to talk about this very specific period in the Hungarian memory politics, they are insufficient to explain what is happening. So some explanations are saying that, you know, this is just a temporary time, you know, we can go to the back, it is just a backlash, we can go back. Or some call it as an authoritarian regime, what we have now, or then a mafia state, a hybrid state. So it's a kind of new form of state which is existing. Or we heard in Attila Pog's presentation that there is a clear distinction between the state and the profession, and according to him, the profession remains untouched by this illiberal takeover. I'm actually seriously questioning that, and I hope that will be a discussion which will be developing. So why do we need to question the previous explanations? Why do we have to think in new ways about describing the memory politics? Because this new type of illiberal memory politics is discrediting, delegitimizing, and defund the existing historical research institutes, including the institute that Attila is working in, and building new institutions consisting of loyal experts, kind of Janitschars. There is a double speech that, you know, on the one hand, it always looks like everything is fine. On the other hand, it's to the outside world, but, you know, the inside communication is very different. It is characterized by anti-intellectualism. It is a part of the populist turn, what we see, of these unashamed citizens who are the drivers of the different political changes, are actually questioning the previously existing values and value systems. And it actually requires a self-censorship of the historians. There is no existing quality assurance system in Hungary. Therefore, this kind of historical work which is produced in Hungary is really problematic on so many different layers, especially because of the compliance of the historians to this system. It's also hijacking the religious framework, and this is an important new element. And I'm arguing that this is not a distortion or revisionism, but a paradigm change in the historiography. And I'm using this concept of the illiberal polypore state to explain what is happening here. And the audience can try to Google what polypore is, but I will explain it later. And it uses mnemonic security and the new truth, constructing a new truth about the past event for unashamed citizens. So this illiberal state is built on the failures of the neoliberalized Eastern Europe, and these cracks in the different liberal politics actually opened up space for this populist turn, partly because the progressive political forces were unable to come up with an emotionally engaging alternative. And that's why this illiberal memory politics is building up on the failures of the liberal memory politics, and it works with three different concepts. And what is important for us is the parallel institutions. And here I would like to go back to the opening photo, the plan of Hanna Senes Memorial, which hopefully will never happen, the plan. And this actually is in the secondary school where Hanna Senes was was educated in Budapest. That's the photo from the 100th anniversary celebration, and you see these elderly white men who are celebrating and actually a leftist militarized revolutionary resisting woman. And this is exactly how the liberal memory politics works. It empties, it hijacks, it instrumentalizes certain memory political issues for its own purpose. Like they are constructing the concept of Wonder Woman. I'm sure you have seen the movie for this bookish but extremely interesting woman. And they were also creating these cartoons, which are really, really very simple. So my argument was here in this 10-minute introduction that we are actually seeing a very different new phase in the memory politics. I was arguing that this doesn't leave anything untouched from the society. It empties, hijacks previously existing concepts, ideas, values. It empties, it instrumentalizes, and it actually expects collaboration from everybody. And no institution remains untouched by this kind of illiberal politics. And here is an article I wrote about this. This is an open access article, so you can download it. And I'm really happy to answer questions and getting into a deep discussion about these issues. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrea. That was also many informations in a really short time. Thank you. Before you can ask the questions, the other Andrea also wants to talk about storytelling and its importance in in memory politics, and also about past elaboration and the difference between official remembrance and the narratives of official remembrance and a more elaborated approach. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much. So as I told you, I'm a writer and I deal with performing arts. And I would like to talk to you about past representation from the point of view of the arts. I'm not going to share a screen, so you have to look at me during my talk. I will start with a personal experience. I wrote a novel 10 years ago about this event we call in Hungarian Trianon. There was turned into a scenario with a film director wanted to make it into a film, and this project was rejected. And on informal channels, we learned, because the director was very eager to do the film, and we learned what is the reason the project was rejected. And we learned that it was rejected because those who decide upon what Hungarian films should be done were uncertain about what sign, positive or negative sign, my novel has towards the Trianon event, which I'm telling you this story to represent how often those people who decide upon what kind of art productions are being created with state money think about history. This is a story, of course, which has no positive or negative sign, but it is storytelling. I will come back to this later. I do a difference between what is past representation and what is past elaboration. And I will argue that most of that art productions, especially today in Hungary in film and some in performing arts, is past representation and has nothing to do with past elaboration. I was looking at this kind of state-promoted past representation in the past, let's say 15 years. And what I observed that in the beginning of the first Orbán era, there was effort to create in visual arts, first of all, and of course in sculpture, in public spaces, in visual arts, big representation of such past events. But then film became the main target, and now there is a tremendous amount of money invested in film and some in performing arts. What kind of past representation we see in such films? The main thing is that there is always a very clear division between what is us and them. And this is a form how to create very devised societies, very devised communities, and especially to create image of who is the enemy. The enemy and the us who are always the Hungarians, and this kind of binary thinking of victims and perpetrators, heroes and traitors, us who are the Hungarians and them who are the foreigners, often different groups, Russians, communists. It's very clear that these kind of two groups are created in order to be put next to each other. And this kind of splitting results in those categories of heroes which are unexisting in the state-promoted art, who are the so-called gray zone, the gray zone which is called by Primo Levi the gray zone, or even the bystanders who we observe a lot in the past 20 years in history, the research of bystanders, who are neither the victims nor the perpetrators. And this is very different from how in past how arts deals with past elaboration, which is not interested in creating this kind of big heroic stories. Heroes and a kind of, I would call a fake heroism is created in these big films. The victims are always the big heroes, the big Hungarian heroes. And there is always a very spectacular mode of how these stories are told. They are very big, very dramatic stories, very spectacular stories, also because there is a lot of money state invests in producing such films. So these are big scale events, either films, but even the performing arts events. Sometimes they are in stadiums or in big squares. I remember seeing in the Hero Square, which is a huge square in Budapest, a performing arts event, which was what we call a horse theater. So it's a theater which implies lots of horses. Just a small parenthesis, 2 days ago, I was seeing a very fine political small-scale show in independent arts, and young actors were telling stories about themselves, and they were complaining that in the University of Arts, they were not trained to ride horses, although today, the most important thing for a Hungarian actor is to be able to ride horses, because they got big roles by riding horses. So they did not got such courses. It's also an important thing that these stories in history are told often without any context. So these historical moments, I will tell you more about which historical moments are the most popular ones, have no context, because context always complicates things. And this is not about complexity, but it's about simplicity. So stories are simplified very much to the big heroes and big traitors. We often call it, I'm telling the language of the critics, we call it often a national kitsch, because this kind of storytelling follows the big, spectacular, very simplistic, black and white storytelling mode, which is very, which might be very kitschy. So this kind of binary thinking, it's always makes these kind of pieces instantly readable. There is nothing very much to think about, or you don't have very much difficulty to interpret it, but immediately, even the actor's technique with lots of face expressions, you can immediately read without having a kind of a second thought, gestures which are very evident. So it's this kind of, it's aimed to a very simple reader who can immediately read everything in this kind of direct language. What kind of moments in history we can, I have only 2 minutes, oh my God. What kind of the great moments of Hungarian history, the most popular ones now, are the communist crimes, and I of course will repeat what Attila said, because we see the same topics he emphasized in the present in art. So the communist crimes, communist Hungarians, but also very strangely, a Russian-friendly country ridiculizes always the Russians on the stage, because the communist Russians are the bad Russians on the stage now. Hungarian glories of the past, but of the mythical past, the very, very, what Attila was enumerating, this past of Hunyadi and Rákóczi, and there you can put 100 horses on the stage and have like very big costume films. These are like historical costume films. Also, films are very much avoiding the Nazi past, and past elaboration in arts, in literature, and in theater is very present when dealing with the Nazi past, because this Nazi past is not part of, in my understanding, is not part of the official memory politics, because then it comes to a very different dealing with the past. You have to face the Hungarian perpetrators, which such memory politics will not deal with. So when we see in contemporary literature, which is in a very strange way untouched by this official memory politics, because film can be produced by the state, theater can be produced, even visual arts, of course, sculptures and in public spaces, everything. But literature is more independent, because you cannot really put writers to write such work which is based on such ideological commitment, so to say. So what I find a lot in literature, even especially in literature and in some of performing arts, some of the performing arts scene, especially in independent theater, is that these art forms do work a lot with past elaboration, because the real past elaboration, when you deal with difficult topics, the roles of Hungarians in conflicting moments of history, the Hungarians as perpetrators, and the so-called big gray zone where victims and perpetrators are very close to each other. So theater and literature is dealing with this kind of attitude and topics, because the state committed film industry and art industry doesn't deal at all with such topics. So what I say that there is a very divided scene on one hand in arts, a kind of art scene which is very much commissioned, supported, financed by the state, and there is another art scene which is dealing with a very different way with the past and dealing with only the typical, the difficult kind of past, and you are not going to have these kind of methods of dealing with the past, which is heroism, which is this splitting of us and them, and creating all the time in the state committed art, all the time creating this image of the enemy as other, because the enemy as other is very much part of the whole ideology of the current Orban era or illiberal state. Thank you. I think I had more than 10 minutes, but maybe I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I think it's totally fine to overstep. It's a huge topic though. So maybe because it's so huge, my first question is, in a nutshell, you all talked about it, but in a nutshell, what is remembered at the moment? I don't know if anyone wants to answer. Andrea?
It's really difficult to answer to this question because there are very different circles of memory, very different agents of memory, very different institutions of memory, and very different languages of memory. What we heard from Andrea. So it would be fantastic to really be able to address this multiplicity of actors in the Hungarian remembrance culture. And we haven't even mentioned that the role of the emigres, because by now there is this very substantial emigre community who are living outside Hungary, and the different institutions which are supporting the political migrants outside Hungary. So these are very different factors and different institutions. But what I would like to maybe add to this, and as a response to what Andrea was saying, is that it's really the key question, because is what will happen next. So what will happen next? And I believe that this kind of differentiation, what Andrea was bringing in about the representation of the past and the elaboration of the past, is something very interesting. We might want to, follow that up and simply think about who are the audience, who are those who are interested in this, who will be a part of this project. Because that's fine that there is a writer sitting somewhere in Berlin in a scholarship and writing a novel, right, which is somehow put up and published in 23 copies. But the question is how this elaborated past, where actually the artists and the art scene is much more ahead of the historians, because the historians are the slaves of the state, and they are the slaves of the system, and they are the slaves of this kind of institutional structure, and it's very difficult to find for them any kind of open space for discussion. So I'm tweeting like art will save us, and I think this talk what Andrea just gave is a very good example that if we think about new forms of remembrance, new language, new forms, new understandings, it is actually the artistic, elaborative memory culture which can actually help us. Thank you.
Attila, I think your microphone is turned off.
So if I may further comment, I think as an intellectual, you always have to be very careful with overall generalizations. So I have never felt myself as a slave of the state, neither that of the communist state nor of any regime. I was fortunate enough to spend more than 4 decades at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, and there was the possibility to work on projects, to come up with discussions, and there was also political control. So my point, I subscribe to a great number of things that both Andreas said, but there is a historical profession in Hungary, excuse me, and we are And there are very different people in this historical profession with very differing views. They are having discussions. There is, for example, a wonderful committee that Andrea established for the history of the Second World War. And I don't think that is not a quality institution. I don't think that a number of other commissions, like think, for example, of just random examples, those colleagues of mine who deal with the Ottoman past, they have substantially contributed to the knowledge about this time. But also the reinterpretations of Hungary's place in the Habsburg Empire and a great number of other things. I have never felt that they would be slaves of the state. There is a very powerful, with institutions supported policy on behalf of the state that you very well described, and I was also trying to present. But at the same time, it is possible also to present valuable academic work, where the quality control is not some kind of an internal, but quite a number of Hungarian historians publish in English, in German, in French, with many distinguished publishing houses and distinguished journals. So basically, I do not have any discussion concerning the mainstream official memory politics, but I have a strong, powerful discussion concerning the position of the Guild of Historians in Hungary.
I strongly disagree with you, of course.
That's fine.
I strongly disagree with you, but I don't think, I mean, this is again not a personal debate, and but it's rather a structural and intellectual history debate. And you know, I think that the wider discussion, and this point might also come up when you are discussing Poland, is how to resist. What kind of forms of resistance is possible in a state, what you can call totalitarian state, mafia state, hybrid regime, or what I call it as an illiberal polypore state. So the quality control is raised hand. Okay. The quality control is, you know, there is this illusion that there is this guild of historians, but I don't think that you can, after this Babeș scandal in the Hungarian Accreditation Committee, you can really take that seriously. And also this subcommittee of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences doesn't get a penny. So it's operating as a institution on the margin, and this is the important point, and that actually connects to the point what Andrea was making, that how to resist, because I mean we can, you know, analyze, you know, this the Hungarian memory politics, which has been done 101 times, but the real question is, the $1 million question is, what will happen next? And I think the real question is, you know, how to resist and what to resist. So I really, I'm not hopeful that some of the colleagues with enormous personal sacrifice are able to publish in peer-reviewed journals, which have been read by 23 people, but you know, joining to a system which is already flawed and problematic, I don't think that is something which is hopeful. What I think is hopeful is the fighting from the margin and creating, like, you know, you very nicely acknowledged my pioneering role in trying to construct an institution which is doing much better job than 3 or 4 lavishly funded state institutions. But the reason why this subcommittee of the history of the Second World War of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences is flourishing is because the people who are part of that, they actually found their vocation, because they have been always pushed to the margin. And now, because of this committee, they think that they can really make the difference, and they are organizing conferences. There is a podcast library. So there are lots of interesting things which they are organizing. And I understand that it's easier to believe that everything is normal, the normalization narrative, and believing in the guild, like during communist times, that, you know, there are these bad communists, but we are doing fine. But this regime is different than the communism was then, So I'm just arguing that maybe this is the time to we are doing memory politics on our different ways, but maybe we should think about the future and how to really face the dramatic consequences of the illiberal memory politics, as far as the destroying the institutions, destroying personal lives, careers, destroying the self-confidence, destroying dignity, and how to fight against this. And yes, I think most of the time we should focus on how to fight. And this, of course, the writer who is sitting alone in the room and writing books, and that's fantastic. But maybe this is the the time to think about different alliances and also ways how to fight. And this is a new uncharted terrain. This kind of resistance is very different than the resistance during communism or Nazism or whatever, because it's a very different wartime we are living in. So that's a very complex period. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't know, and Andrea Tompa, do you think, maybe it's also a private question, but is writing literature, is it a kind of activism for you? And related to that, you talked about the importance of showing complexities of history and how storytelling can maybe give one answer to that. What do you think are the keys for a plural telling of the history, or pluralistic, sorry?
I don't really think about literature as a activism, although I was recently part of a book called Fairy Tale is for Everyone, which is a collection of tales, and some of it's all older tales rewritten by contemporary writers, and some of the tales imply LGBT characters. And this book became really a part of an activism because it was a big political scandal in Hungary around it, and it was destroyed by a Hungarian MP, and then it was translated in more than 10 languages. So it's both success and failure in the same time. But this book became more than a book. But the book I write, they don't become anything else, that they are novels, and they are not representing anything more than literature. But I must say that in some of the cases of my books, I often got invitations to universities, but not to literature departments, but to history departments, because these books are used also in a way that through these stories, you can understand something about history, which is a different view or a different sensibility, not necessarily a different history, but a different sensibility toward the story. But if I may go back to Andrea's question, what the future is, what I find very stressful now in Hungary for people who are dealing with arts, especially for those who work in film and performing arts, actors, people actors, they are invited to work in different frames, and people immediately become very ashamed if they start to work in this kind of state-funded big film projects, which are very clearly ideologically oriented, and then they want to go back to their theaters, which are like more complex theaters and thinking in a different way. And people they have to do all the time these choices and to reject things and to be exposed to a lot of shame because of taking different jobs. And this kind of splitting of the whole society is, of course, in every profession, but in arts profession is very visible. And it's very painful to see that even my friends would come to me and apologize because they are accepting a role in such a film, and you cannot answer to this question because it's a personal choice. So what is represented in these films by the splitting of society, and these films really serve the society to be splitted more and more. It is happening in the back of how these films are produced too, by this kind of conflicts all the time in the professions due to this splitting of the society.
Yeah, if there are no questions, I would like to join in and say that, yes, the liberal regimes are actually working with this creating hate, fear, and splitting the society into tiny groups of people and individuals who are quarreling each other, and this kind of apolitical statement. But this is on the state level, and also you have got these personal connections, what Andrea was mentioning. What is the difference between the artists and the historians is that these the kind of publications are not anything goes. So in a sense that it's very clear that when you start publishing in these illiberal outlets, that there is no quality control and anything goes, and they are appointing professors and different university teachers without any kind of political without any kind of professional background. Because let me go back to this concept of slave, that in these geopolitical configurations, the historians are expected to support the state and the state ideology, and also that kind of memory politics, which was so nicely described by Attila. And of course, if you are working on the history of the 12th century pottery in a city, you think that you can escape, but you can't. And this is the case also from the STEM research, but this kind of political control is not only in social sciences and in humanities, but also in STEM research. So it's a part of a general framework, how creating this kind of self-censorship, but at the same time, not even the self-censorship is complete, because you have to constantly be ashamed of this, and creating this kind of personal ties, how to get away with this. But we have a question from Daniela, and I'm sorry, I shut up.
No, fine. First, Attila, do you want to respond to that?
Not now. Let us first listen to the audience.
Okay. So yeah, Daniela, you wrote that you had a question or some comments.
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
I'm not quite sure if my microphone is working. So thank you for those interesting presentations and talks. Can I introduce myself as a response to Andrea Pető's question, who we are? Well, I'm a historian currently working at the University of Vienna, and my research topic is how identity is shaped in the 18th and 19th century Hungary, actually. So I'm historian for Hungarian studies, actually, which makes it be interesting in this talk, of course. And I would like to have a comment on this institutional question, those questions about the historians and the situation today in Hungary, because I worked in Hungary actually for 2 years. First, I tried to be part of the CEU, which would not be granted because this was the time when the CEU was basically banned from Hungary and had to move to Austria. And then I wanted to go to the Hungarian Academy of Science, and this was the moment when the Hungarian Academy of Science was basically not destroyed, but was stripped and reformed by Orban. And this was quite quite difficult to get funding for my research projects in Hungary. And I think it's always, when we look at those different kind of historical institutes that are existing in Hungary, most of all, of course, in Budapest, it always, or sometimes you see it already in the name, like the Veritas Institute, meaning, of course, Truth Institute, which is a historical institute, which is founded by the government and by the state. And this, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, is seen as something like the opposite to the research of the Academy of Science and also the universities. At least it was back a couple of years ago. And at least so far as I can recall, I never encountered those historian names in international research publications, international journals, who are working at institutes like the Veritas Institute. And now I have three questions, rather small question, to the 1956 memory. Andrea Tompa already answered it partially. So the 1956 revolution is always written in the history as the grand fight for liberty against the Russians, the Soviets, and where the Russians are playing this role of the enemy. And my question would be right now, if it can be really said, and if it can be really sold by the Hungarian government, that those Russians are thus just the communist Russians, and now the Russia today, that's a good Russian. Those are the good friends of Hungary. This is really working successfully. And the other two questions I would have is that there's, of course, the history of the Hungarian nation, the history of the Hungarian and the memory of the Hungarian nation. But Hungary was, and still is, in my opinion, also a multi-ethnic construction, and how this multi-ethnic heritage is memorized today by the Hungarian government. And with this comes also the other question might be also a comment that Orban is not only doing memory politics within Hungary, within the state of Hungary, but also in the former territories of the Hungarian kingdom, which now belong to other states, of course. And how you would see this kind of memory politics, and how you would experience this kind of memory politics, which most interesting does not really take place in the Austrian borderland, but of course, you know, in Slovakia, in Vietnam, this debate about the Tyrol, in the Transcarpathian Ukraine, or also in Transylvania. Yeah, I hope you could understand and follow me. Thank you.
Okay, so we have three questions here. Did you understand the questions? Okay. Who wants to answer to that? Andrea?
I pick up the second questions about the multi-ethnic Hungary, and being a Hungarian from Romania, from Transylvania. I also wanted to refer in my talk about this whole Hungarian cultural politics and past remembrance, which it goes far beyond Hungary, and it is very much present around Hungary, especially among the Hungarians in Romania. But this kind of multi-ethnic Hungary does not exist at all from this perspective of the official past representation, or if it exists, it's very, very stereotypical, it's very traditionalist, and it's represented by Roma people in folk costumes, or it's very folkish, and it's something about an unexisting world and unexisting reality. Also, Hungarians in Romania, which is a very complex, it is and was a very complex community. It's viewed from Hungary like a very homogeneous kind of community. And those Hungarians are the clear ones who are like keeping the traditions and knowing a lot of folk music and songs and wearing costumes, folk costumes. This representation of Hungarians in the media is like very, very 19th century romantic, traditionalist, folkish thing. So that reality, you will never see a mixed marriage in such an environment, a Romania-Hungarian mixed marriage or a Hungarian-Roma mixed marriage, because that is very much opposed to this kind of, especially nowadays, promoted clearness of Hungarians. So this is one of the very important things literature and theater can bring here. And I myself wrote a lot about how not homogeneous is Transylvania. So there is a lot what can be done here and what can be said here, but the official narratives are this kind of 19th century romantic, nostalgic narratives.
Mm-hmm.
I might pick up, I fully subscribe to what Andrea Tompa was saying. I think that in connection with the Trianon commemorations, where as far as the official side was concerned, there was not a single reference, to say the least, to the complexity of the whole question. May I remind you of perhaps our audience that there is a new Trianon monument in the center square, in Kossuth Square. And as far as the profession was concerned, so to come back to our fight with Andrea, to discussion, so that was harshly criticized by the profession. And there was a huge public debate whether it is appropriate to list all the names of the Hungarian state before the first, all the names of the settlements of the Hungarian state, just in one complex structure without clearly defining the background to this. But so that was a subject of discussion. But I think the question that was aiming at me is much more about the institutions. And I think it's absolutely true that a number of new institutions were created just in order to support the official memory politics. But sometimes when a government creates something, it's not exactly what comes out of this. It's not exactly what they expected to come out of this. So I pretty closely observe, and for a long time observe, what is going on in the profession, and there are good things also coming out also of these institutions, and there are also bad things coming out of the profession. This I cannot imagine how one can struggle against it, or as far as the historians are concerned. The historians can come up with good articles, with good books, with radio interviews, with television interviews. They are trying to struggle also to create their own sources of achieving the public opinion, but they are not partisans. They are working with their own instruments. And I think there is definitely a difference between the traditional academic institutions, including chairs. There are very different history chairs, be it in Debrecen or Szeged, etc. There was recently a contemporary history conference, which relatively seldom happens in Hungary, that historians dealing with a large field get together and are trying to discuss things. And then you could also show that there are strong representatives of powerful criticism of the Hungarian memory policies and also other tendencies. So I think it's much more colorful. Just what I would like to emphasize, as far as the institutions are concerned, that also within the institutions, there are many, many tendencies. And if we want to get a good understanding, we have to be very careful with this overall generalization.
Thank you. I think that the generalizations are actually helping us to understand the big picture, and then it gives us the opportunity to place the different actors and the different institutions into their right place.
Oh, your microphone just turned off.
Oh, so what I wanted to say is that the big picture is needed in order to understand the different tendencies and different actors. I put in the chat, I don't know those who will be looking at the recording will see this, but this is the article we wrote about Ildikó Barna. This is also open access in the contemporary European history about the Hungarian historical profession, coding and analyzing the historical journals for 30 years, and basically coming to very sad conclusions about this guild, what Attila was saying, mentioning, especially as far as the inclusion of women and gender is concerned. So this hasn't changed a bit in the past 30 years. So that's also something interesting to say, that what actually changed in the past 2-3 years. This article was published like 4 years ago. What actually changed to the right direction is the ban of gender studies in Hungary, because this kind of paradoxical recognition made gender studies cool. Women's studies school, and those colleagues who were, just saying, Andrea, this is not important what you are doing. This is just about women and gender. This is not important. Suddenly recognize that gender is like the canary in the gold mine. If gender studies is attacked, then the next step will be other democratic institutions and values. So the recognition what gender history has not received in the past 30 years actually was given to gender history by the attack of the liberal regime. And now I can say, and this is now the response to the question of Daniela, and I'm so happy to see you, that now the profession is booming. It's booming because of this paradoxical recognition. International funding is pouring into gender history, which was not the case in the past 30 years. Lots of conferences, volumes, monographs, lecture series. There are 3 new schools of researching gender history had been established in the past 3 years, past 3 months. So there is this fantastic development in a field which was expected to be a pariah of the history writing, and which is expected to be persecuted by the government. So now let me go to the response to the question of Daniela, that no matter that it looks like that the government has got this very consistent and well thought and extremely successful memory politics, I'm actually arguing that it's really not successful on so many different reasons. First of all, because they did not have a single original idea. That's why we call it polypore memory, illiberal memory politics. What they are doing is using, appropriating, instrumentalizing previously existing concepts, ideas, and processes. And when you question about, raise a question about how come that a country which has been occupied 3 times by the Russians, that this country in the past 3 years was moved from an anti-Russian to a pro-Russian attitude. I mean, then you see that the impact of this illiberal memory politics and the illiberal kind of politics of anti-intellectualism, and also the forcing different intellectuals and institutions to collaborate actually brought the result. But this result is also paradoxical because the result is not what they intended to have. Let me give you an example. And the example is this, the sexual violence committed by the Red Army soldiers, about what I wrote a book, which was also published by the Seagull Verlag in German. So those who are watching this can get this volume, that the change in this whole discourse about the massive rape which was committed by the Red Army soldiers in Hungary, which was silenced, and it was not really a topic to discuss because of the communist historiography, then this kind of discourse changed because of a film. A film which was done by Fruzsina Skrapski. No matter that, you know, in 1999 I published an article about this based on 3 years of research, but that was an academic article, and the film actually changed the discourse, and it made the whole issue into a public debate. And interestingly, this film has got a follow-up, which is about the children who were born about rape. And this will be launched on the 8th of December this year. And I'm really curious, you know, how this film, which is supported by the state, of course, which is speaking about the horrors and the crimes committed by the Red Army soldiers in Hungary, will be somehow fitting into the official memory politics of the government. So I'm really curious to see, you know, the reception of this movie, because that somehow illustrates the paradoxes and the problems of illiberal memory politics, that it doesn't have values. There is this illiberal pragmatism that they are saying whatever is useful, but at a certain moment you have to say something, and this is the moment when they are saying something and it doesn't fit. So I just would like to say that this is an exciting time, really an exciting time to live and to see how the memory politics is changing, and who are the actors and what are the different tendencies which are influencing the different levels of memorialization. But to finish with a kind of important note, that we have to actually acknowledge that the historians, the professional historians, really did not pioneer in changing the discourse, and that's why Andrea's books are used for in different university education, because that is actually grasping the problems, the complexities, in a way that it is accessible and understandable for a wider public. So this is an interesting response to this populist turn in history writing and in the liberal memory politics, and I'm really excited to see the next phase, and this discussion is one of those discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, so if we still have a little time, may I also comment on this Russian issue? So I think that in mainstream Hungarian memory politics, it would have come to a pro-Russian tendency. No. This is just being used occasionally, and here I basically agree with Andrea. On various occasions, sometimes the hostile attitude toward the Russians, on other occasions, the friendly attitude toward the Russians is being pointed out. So this is not a transformation of a mainstream tendency, but it keeps using whenever it is appropriate for argument to use any historical issue relating to the Russians. For example, I don't know if you followed the Prime Minister's, I think it was a press conference or a roundtable discussion in Berlin. He was speaking about the Hungary, how many experiences Hungary has along historical Russian brutality. And in a peculiar way, he was also saying that we also have our Zelensky. He is called Imre Nagy. So all of a sudden, he integrates someone whom he was trying to exclude earlier in a different context, was trying to exclude from the remembrance policy, is now integrated because under the present circumstances, this seems to be useful. So I don't see here a straightforward tendency moving consequently in one or the other direction.
Okay, thank you so much. Time is moving on so fast. I have so many questions, but maybe we have time for one more question. I don't know if there's a question left in the audience. If not, I do have a last question. So we talked, Andrea, you made clear, so let's talk us about the future and what will happen, what can we do actually. And one thing which is always related to the future is the younger generation. So I would also be curious, what would you say is the role the younger generation plays? So they are born in the aftermath or growing up in the aftermath of the communism and of its collapse, and it's a new generation. Still, they're growing up in the current times. How influenced are they by Orban's politics? And also, you told us earlier that the history curriculum was changed, I think 2 years ago in 2020. So yeah, there's a lot happening also regarding the young people. What is their access to dealing with the past, and what do you think is their role for the future? It's a big question.
If you are talking about the professions, I don't know whether you are talking about history education in general or young professional historians. I think so. I think the question relates more to the professional historians, right?
No.
Yeah?
Actually, also to the average, let's say, average people who are. Yeah.
Oh, then of course, then I understand you. But then it's a completely different picture because strange mixture of heroism and victimization. This is the peculiarity, I think, of this. Of the consequence of this education, because on the one hand, as Andrea Tompa was also pointing out, the heroism in the films, this is also frequently pointed out in history education, but at the same time, there is also the victim position is also very much emphasized, and this leads to that I can observe among young people who are not very much educated, so to say, by their parents, only educated by the schools, to terrible confusions. So I think this is in a peanut shell. So this is my view.
Any additions?
I would like to add a recent experience with my students, which was very positive. We shared an experience of a very kind of straightforward, mainstream, Christianity promoting, simplistic, heroism understanding of a story. And we are studying together performance analysis. And I opened up the discussion, and in the next 3 minutes, it's clear that just all the students reject such an offer from the stage or from the film. That simply when Andrea Pető was saying that the state is not very successful in promoting its ideology, it's not even successful in promoting this ideology in arts, because it is successful in creating this, in producing it, because the films are done with like the billions of Hungarian forints. But then I'm not sure about the impact of these films. I'm not sure about people rushing to see these films. I see that there is a lot of effort put in selling these films and making compulsory for some schools, but I would not send my boy to see such a film. I can do that as a parent. So it's not very successful, because even if it's a mainstream simplistic kind of production, not what people want to see, because if people want to see such kind of art productions, they would turn on Netflix and look at like different costume films, and not looking at such romantic and not very good, honestly, because most of the artists are hired with very little experience, with not big artistic careers, and with not very good curriculum, so to say. So it's not easy to sell this kind of art, because it's the state wanting to produce it, but not very much people wanting to look at it. So I'm an optimist.
Yeah, I'm also actually an optimist. And I would say that the first step to this better stories, to tell better stories about our past, to use Dina George's term, is that we are asking the question, what did we do wrong? Because it's easy to say that the present youth is uneducated and we should tell them what to do. I mean, we are a part of the educational system. We created this system where they are actually facing with their biggest crisis of the 21st century. They are not equipped because the educational system, what we were a part of, actually failed to teach them. And also that the climate crisis in which they are actually have to imagine their future is a looming horror behind. But and this kind of inability to speak about meaningful issues in a good and accessible language, that is the task of the historians. And I don't think, Attila, that I indicated that the historians are partisans. I think that the historians should have a take personal responsibility and institutional responsibility for the stories which are being told every second and every minute. And every second we have to look into the mirror and ask, what did we do wrong? And recognizing that here is a unbelievable social and cultural need for authentic, understandable, responsible stories about our past. And that's why I'm tweeting "The art will save us," and that's why it's fantastic that we had Andrea Tompa with us, because that's a very different perspective than the usual historical perspective. And thank you very much for organizing the event.
Yeah, thank you really much for joining. We reached the end of the panel. Our time is over. These were also really strong finishing words, I would say, but one last quick question, maybe you can answer it really shortly, every one of you. What do you think, what can we all learn from Hungary?
Oh, that's easy. That's easy. I mean, Hungary is a laboratory. We wrote an article with a colleague of mine for the Open Democracy about Hungary as a laboratory. In Hungary, the different transnational illiberal policies had been tested. And if you see what happened in Russia or in Turkey or in Brazil, you find all those translations into Hungary. And this is also a part of the provincialization of the Hungarian politics, that the elite is not looking for these international examples, but they believe that this is only happening in Hungary. No. These are, basically the translations and the exports of other issues. But, Hungary is where everything is being tested, and then that has a spillover impact. So I would suggest I can repeat what I told my friends in Italy and in Sweden, who are totally depressed by the election result, that first, look, Hungary, we are living in the illiberal regime for 12 years and we are still, existing. And the second is make a list what kind of policy transfers were happening, what kind of decisions were made, and then look at the resistance, look at what kind of what resistance worked, what resistance did not work. And also take the Hungarian intellectual collaboration as a bad example of how actually the different normalization narratives are making impossible even for those who want to resist. Thank you.
My answer to this question would be much shorter and very simple. Survival strategies. You can learn from Hungary, from Hungarian history, various forms of survival strategy, both in the positive and also in the negative sense.
I would like to add here that really good past elaboration always has three things: humor, lack of rage, and some kind of happiness. And I would like to end up with a quote of Kertész in his novel Faithlessness. He says, "Yes, the next time I am asked, I ought to speak about that, the happiness of the concentration camps," because he argues that happiness is everywhere, even in Auschwitz. So this is what I think it's an important thing, not to lose sense of humor and not to engage in rage.
Okay, thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts and for all those interesting inputs. I feel like we could keep on discussing for hours. Maybe we can continue in a later place. So thank you again, and I will link all the things you send in the chat under the video when we publish it. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.